Okay, here we are. More big July astrology for you. So we started the month by looking at the nodal change. We had that massive full moon in um, Capricorn, and now we are moving to the new moon in Cancer. And the new moon in Cancer is opposite Pluto in Capricorn and squaring the nodes. And so this is what we call the cardinal cross when planets are sitting at the crosses. And I'll show you at the in the chart what I'm talking about, which is massive initiatory energy. So the cardinal cross is what we call the world axis. So we've got, hold on, of course, I've got that stupid bar that sits across my chart, so I can't see it. Move, move, thank you. So we've got the new moon up here at the top of the chart, sitting at 24 degrees Cancer. We've got Pluto down here at the anaretic or crisis degree of Capricorn. And then the nodes today, on the day of the new moon, are finally changing signs and will be in the Aries Libra axis later today. So there's a new moon today, and there is the true node shift. So in astrology, with these points that sort of are mathematical, they don't exactly exist, but there's just a ton of gravity around the specific points in the zodiac. We use either measurements called true or mean. We do that with Lilith also. Lilith is another place that's related to the moon that just has a lot of gravity, but it isn't a true body, right? Um, so we use a calculation that's either true or mean. So the mean is like the average. It's a much more stable kind of calculation. And then true is a little bit more erratic. And this chart is set for true. I oscillate between using both depending on what feels true. I'm very much a transmission based astrologer. You'll notice that I don't tend to put out forecast before we're inside of the energy because I always want to feel the energy. Um, I did do a chart for the 13th, which is when the mean nodes moved into Aries and Libra. And you can even think of that if you want to use the true node, or like if you want to have an allegiance to just one of these bodies, you can look at, the one that moves in first is kind of setting up the stage, right, for the one that moves in second. And so whether you want to use the mean nodes or the true nodes, we are now officially having in the midst of the shift, we'll put it that way. Um, and this is significant. It's huge on an evolutionary level when the nodes change signs. So, what are the nodes? I know that we've talked about this, and sometimes I feel redundant when I say again what things are, but I never say it quite the same. So, I'm hoping that when I explain what this is, you will get something out of it. So, the nodes in our chart are the evolutionary axis in our chart. So, our natal birth chart, where the nodes are these little signs that look like a cup here and a cup like a poured upside down cup here. This is the south node. I call it the medicine bag. And then this is kind of where we pour that medicine bag out in our chart. They in Vedic astrology are called Ketu, the south node, and Rahu, the north node. And the mythology around the nodes in Vedic astrology, I think, is very interesting. We'll do a short synopsis of it because I think it's always helpful to personify anthropomorphize, right? These bodies, because they really are gods that are consistently initiating us. They are the gods that hold our curriculum, our evolutionary curriculum for our life. So as it goes, the initial cosmological story in the Vedic astrology for the nodes is that the moon and the sun god were going to hold a party to churn the waters or the ocean of life together. And so they invited all of their friends, the what we call the devas or angels, the beings of light, to this party to help them churn the sea so that they could bring the world into existence. And what they realized after having just the devas at the party, which are angels, was that they couldn't get a turn because there was no polarity. And so they needed to invite the asuras or devils, the devil beings, to come and help them turn the world into being, because you need a dark and a light polarity, or you need friction in order to churn something, right? So you're already getting the feel of the nodes inside of this story. So, anyways, Rahu and Ketu used to be one being, and they were an Asura, and so they came with the Ashura party to the gathering. They came with the devil beings, right? The bad beings, the dark beings, and um, so after they were finished turning the world into being, they decided that they'd have a celebration, but they didn't tell the dark beings that they were going to have this celebration. They wanted them to leave the party, and what they were going to do was give in this celebration the nectar or the ambrosia of life and immortality to the angels. So they were very they were thinking, it wouldn't be a good idea to give that to an Ashura. We just want to give that to the Devas. So somehow Rahu Ketu, who was just one being at this point, caught wind of the fact that they wanted the dark beings to leave so that they could only give the ambrosia of life to the angel beings. So he put on an angel cloak and disguised himself and got in line so that he could have a drop of this ambrosia. And one of the gods, the moon goddess, noticed the tail from underneath the angel cloak as he came up to get his drop of ambrosia. And she noticed it just as the drop of ambrosia was touching his tongue. And she threw her moon disc at him, and it sliced him in half, but not after he got that gift of immortality. And so the gods sat around thinking, what can we do with this devil or dark being, this Ashura, this demon, this snake like dragon, right? What do we do with him? And so they decided that they would throw him up on the orbit of the sun and the path of the moon and keep him there and kind of curse him for all eternity to always be chasing the head and the tail, because he's now cut in half. And so only during the eclipses is when the head of Rahu eats the tail of Ketu, catches the tail, and they become one being again. So just during the eclipse times. And that's why eclipses have that kind of like eerie harbinger of kind of doom or something. They're a time that isn't very outwardly celebrated. We don't hold ceremony on eclipses specifically for the purpose of the power that Rahu and Ketu have when they come together, right? And so it is thought that then Ketu, or Rahu, sorry, which is the north node, is the head of this dragon. And what can a head do? So a head can steer, it can eat, it can eat excessively because it's got no body and no digestive system. And so we look at the North Node kind of as like the head of our life. It shows us where we are going. It can act like a hungry ghost in the sense that there hasn't yet been assimilation in this point yet. And so wherever our North Node is in our chart, we're working to integrate lessons. We're working to resolve karma and kind of put this dragon back together again, right? And so Ketu then, what is he? He's the stomach. So the stomach has no head. It seemingly has no direction. It's a little lazier. It's the point in our chart where we've already integrated lessons, where mastery already exists for us. And we don't need to necessarily do any more work on that part of our chart. And we tend not to, because we've already gotten the mastery. We don't need challenge in that area. We don't need to grow. We don't need to go to the gym and work out. We've already got that part. So the tail of the dragon can digest and assimilate stuff, but it doesn't have that same drive towards wanting to resolve things. So that's kind of the Vedic outlook on the nodes. I tend to look at the South Node personally as our medicine bag and a place of purging, a point of endings, a place where we've already got a lot of mastery, and now we need to end something, release something, or let go of something. And the North Node being a point that we're drawn towards, a point of accumulation, a point of growing. And so on the North Node side, some shadows here could be greed, or like hungry ghost syndrome, where we're constantly taking in new stuff, but not really digesting and assimilating or integrating those things into our lives. And the South Node shadow side can be where we get complacent, or we don't end up purging the things that we need to purge. And so those are kind of like a way to look at the nodes in your own chart. They show you, where is my medicine, South Node? Like, where is the inherent mastery that I already have? And the North Node being, where am I going to weave that through? How am I going to weave that into existence on the material plane in this lifetime, and digest it and assimilate it? Because the North Node kind of points us to where some of our karmic lessons are, right, for this lifetime. And so when we have nodes in the sky, so what we call transiting nodes, like where they are currently, we tend to look at those as collective editing points. The nodes show us where we need to make changes in our lives, where we're headed, and where we need to let go. And so the nodes moving into Aries and Libra, this is the relationship axis, right? And so Aries, and I did a whole video on this, so I'm not going to spend this whole video talking about it. You can go if you want a deeper dive, but we'll touch on it here for a minute. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It's ruled by Mars. It is essentially, if we look at Pisces as being the liminal waters that we swim through in order to come into this incarnation, and the area we swim in on our way out, it is an undifferentiated place, Pisces. So our essence is kind of like swimming through the cosmos. And when we get to Aries, the first sign, that's when our being, our essence, is handed the divine spark. So in a way, it's a point of separation. It's where we've separated from that union with the divine, and we're given an essence. So it rules our essence self, right? That place where the divine spark is embedded in us. And because Aries is ruled by Mars, and it's the first sign of the chart, one of the statements, the personal statements that goes to with Aries is I am. Like, just that principle of being, of having the divine spark, and being a soul that exists. I am, right? And because it's not very mature, being the first sign, it hasn't really gotten its body like it does in Taurus and gone through the conditioning process. It's got, like an air of innocence to it and impulsivity, because it hasn't learned refinement yet. It's very primal, right? There's this primal fire involved with Aries. And so, like, for instance, I have my moon in Aries, and the moon, of course, is deeply related to Cancer, which we'll be talking about in a moment. But like, our home, our childhood, our sense of security and attachment in the world, like how well we attached, and how good we feel being here. It's a very vulnerable and raw body in the chart. It's also like a pattern generating machine. So where a lot of our patterns crop up is in the moon. And for me, I've always, had a very strong attachment to my primal kind of animal body, right? So there's lots of magnetism inside of that. Mars is related to that principle of magnetism. And when we are related to like our lower chakra areas, right? Mars is related to the solar plexus, but you can think of Aries as kind of like that primal impulse. It's very impulsive. It doesn't think first. It acts on its instinct. It's animalistic. And And so it can get us in trouble. People who have Aries placements can seem impulsive. They can seem bombastic, like they make impulsive choices. We don't quite understand how they're going to follow them up, but it's great for instigating things, right? It's great for beginning a project or beginning something. And it's also where we find some of our divine will, right? Like the authority to back that I am presence, right? So for me, I really see Aries, like if we were going to distill it all the way down, and especially for the purposes of understanding how this axis works, as the essence self, right? So it's where we've gotten the divine spark, and there is this, you know, innocent essence self there that's just very excited to begin life. I see it related to the Fool card, or that it can be related to the Fool card in the journey of the tarot. Aries, because it's that first step out onto this grand journey of life. And we're very kind of naive, right? And so we can end up in places that we don't necessarily want to be. So then, the soul goes on this whole journey through Taurus, where it gets a body, and through Gemini, where it gets siblings. So it starts to sort of see its world through that kind of function of bumping up against different things, bumping up against duality. Gemini rules duality. And so it's where we start to understand ourselves through friction. And then Cancer rules the home. And so the soul is sort of indoctrinated into the culture of home, and begins like the developmental process. And this is where attachments really begin to form. And then you get into Leo and self-expression, and Virgo and the capacity to refine things for ourselves. And then Libra, all of the sudden, which is the opposite side of the Aries axis, really is when we begin to look at the other, and how important that process of other is to our own process of evolution, where we begin to be able to have partnerships and relationships. We look at how we affect a space when we walk into it. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where someone has told you, like, you did XYZ in this scenario and it made everyone uncomfortable. That's a very kind of like Aries thing to do. Like, you're not super aware um of like what's alive in the space, and how your essence self is affecting that. And so that's exactly what Libra deals with. Libra is like the tuning fork. It can walk into a space and immediately sort of like its strength is this capacity to attune to its environment. It cares about bringing harmony and balance to a space. So if you've got strong Libra placements, a lot of times the way you move is so much different from an Aries, like just kind of, instinctively walking in and being your biggest, most bold, bombastic self. As an Aries, as a Libra, you're going to be more concerned with like, what's the energy of the space? How am I affecting it? Can I change it? Is there something that I can bring as some of my mastery, and is Libran, and the capacity to harmonize and balance spaces? Can I bring in some flavor here that would help to even out, like a tense atmosphere? And so Libras, or people who have strong Libra placements in their chart, really have to be sure that they're not losing who they are in the process of prioritizing harmony in a space. Libra is also, I think, one of the most interesting mystery schools of the zodiac. And so if we hold that the signs of the zodiac are mystery schools, Libra is really where we meet a lot of are just basic mundane lessons. Like, what does it mean to be a person and be incarnated? Libra holds a lot of those lessons for us, because Saturn is exalted in Libra. And it seems a little strange, as Libra is ruled by Venus, and Venus is all about good feeling, love, relationships, that kind of action of being glue. So, like sticking two things together. And Saturn is that planet with the rings. And so it's kind of very boundaried and self contained in a way. It's about mastery, refinement, duty, responsibility, limitation. discipline, the word no, hard work, that capacity to seed our legacy. Like Saturn knows if we were going to build a pyramid, that we would put this brick in this place for the longest lasting structure to be built that will stand for generations. Like Capricorn is a Saturn ruled sign, and it really kind of looks at that action exactly. Like, how do we build a legacy that will last for generations? And it's related to our ancestors for that very reason. There's this long kind of lineage related to the mystery school of that sign. So we bring Saturn and that function into a, a, a Venus ruled space. And what do we get, right? So we kind of get this emanation of Ma'at, and she's a goddess from the Egyptian pantheon, and her totem is or one of her symbols is the scales with the heart and the feather. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen this heart and feather. I'm going to try and make myself bigger here because so, scales, heart, and feather on one side. And so one of the things she says is that you can enter heaven if your heart weighs less than a feather. If your heart weighs more, you can't enter heaven. And now, can you imagine needing to live your life with high heart values like that when we've come in with this human body to have this human experience? I mean, that is essentially the narrow path, like to have refined your being in such a way that your heart is essentially going to live or weigh less than a feather. So you're entering the afterlife, you would have to be pure, right? And so one of the shadow side, and not everybody is called to that. And I don't believe, after having looked at thousands of charts, that there are very many people who are called to live that kind of spiritual life. It's really kind of the life of the ascetic, and who devotes their entire life to spirituality and meditation and to that kind of idea of non-attachment. Or you could look at it as like the supernal path of the Christian mystic, the contemplative. It's very much Saturn in Libra, meeting in this Venus ruled sign, like, because Venus rules values. And so when Saturn comes into this space, it makes it kind of the values of the high heart. And one of the shadow sides then of Libra, so understanding this whole mystery school, and Libra, Saturn brings in this kind of fated or karmic element to Libra, and this action of justice, or the scales in general, speaks to us of karma. That's essentially what karma is. It's the constant balancing of the scales. It's the constant justice of the cosmos. It's the constant cause and effect. It's never, ever, ever static. The balancing thing goes on all of the time. We could say that nature seeks balance. And so when we've got an eye consistently on this kind of function of balancing the karmic scales, we can get kind of trapped in archetypal, idealistic thinking, right? Because if we're always having to balance the scales, we're never really just cool with what's going on in the present moment. It kind of always takes us out of ourselves. And Libras can as a shadow side, tend to project archetypal purity or roles onto the world and onto people, and have this expectation that people show up inside of archetypal purity, rather than what I say is the mantra of the Libra Aries axis. We've got Aries, the essence self. So the essence self in me, Libra meets the essence self in you. And I honor and revere that, right? And so if we always have this exalted expectation of archetypal purity projected out into the world, people have a hard time meeting that expectation. And we're constantly feeling let down. And so one of the challenges for people who've got strong Libra is to really understand what strengthens ecosystems. And that is like, what do you need for good soil? Well, you need bacteria and viruses, and oftentimes like manure and, unpleasant putrefying things actually create a good rich soil. And so one of the mystery school lessons for Libra is to really come into a relationship with the messy human in ourselves and the messy humans then in everybody else. And so there's this real beautiful action that Venus does for us, is that she helps us meet and relate to the world. And then Saturn as it is, right? Like he's very related to reality and just the isness of life, right? Like this is just how it is. Sorry about your luck kind of thing. That's a very it's a very Saturnine energy. And so, we take that attunement, that meeting, that being in relationship, and we marry that to Saturn with the isness of what's arising, right? And that's kind of the lesson of the Libra mystery school. Like, how do we be in relationship with the isness of life when it's messy, when it's dark, when it hurts, when it's not meeting our expectations? How, instead of projecting archetypal purity onto people or, just the world in general, can I meet what's arising in the moment and be with it? The essence of me, the divine spark in me, the authentic, raw, vulnerable, primal part of me, just meeting reality as it is. And when you meet it from that Libra side, it's a little bit more refined. It's a little bit more elegant than how you would meet it as in an Aries energy, which is very impulsive and bombastic. And again, kind of primal, and it can just be bebopping all over the place and not really aware, very like attuned to the environment, like we said. And so that's essentially what we're going to see pop up here is like, where are these projected expectations of archetypal purity? And we see that manifesting in the collective with all the social justice movements. I often feel like when I read through a thread and there's people from social justice movements on these threads, I don't have an issue with the intention of the movements always. Put a caveat there, some are distorted, but some I actually agree with. But the expectation inside of those movements tends to not really see humanity, or they argue for the sake of the human, but they don't allow humanity inside of the detractors. And so there, in essence, there's a lot of canceling going on. So they're projecting this archetypal purity, and in this case the archetype is the social movement in and of itself, onto the world, and expecting everyone to fit inside of that glove. And if you don't, there's a negation of humanity. There's a lot of like humiliating rhetoric. The tone takes on this kind of like death mother essence, which we've talked about before. And then, people are canceled, and canceling is in essence the annihilation of a human. It's the erasure, or the attempted erasure of a human. And so I think that this will become a topic that we begin to talk about in the collective. Like, how can we just allow humans to exist as humans and meet each other in that place without these expectations? And I say that for the right side and the left side. You can see that they're essentially mirrors of each other. And when one goes to one extreme, the other, counteracts that with another extreme. It's something that Jung called enantiodromia. And so you can only get so far out on these extreme parts of the spectrum before they swing back in for this balancing thing. And in fact, the extreme ends of the spectrum are actually in service to the balancing effect. And so those are all Libra things. Extremes and balance is a Libra thing. So we may see things go very extreme. We may see a lot of primal and animalistic energy, and then a huge conscious acknowledgement of how kind of out of balance things have gotten, and then this conscious choice to begin the repair and the rebalancing. and ending up in a good place. And so I hope when we leave this axis that our relationship skills have been refined and our capacity to meet other humans as humans has been refined. I say that one of the biggest healing lessons I've ever had in the relationship with my mother wound came out of the Libra Mystery School, because I realized that I was projecting the archetype of like the perfect mother onto her. And it wasn't until I just saw her as Betsy, as a fallible human being and a pretty kooky, silly, I mean, just human, that I was really able to heal a lot of the wounds that I had, because I could meet her finally as who she was and appreciate that she isn't necessarily going to change. She's never going to be the pure archetype of mother for me, and that's actually not a very human expectation to have in the first place. So that's this axis, and some of the stuff that we can see come up here. I got married during the Libra Aries axis. So there's definitely stuff that's going to be transforming inside of relationships. What's interesting is I'll probably sign divorce papers. It's very amicable and conscious, and very kind of beautiful separation. It's been like a beautiful completion. So I don't mean to alarm anybody that I'm in distress about that, but it's very interesting that we were married and initiated this cycle, and we'll be completing it inside of a nodal cycle. And when I looked at that, I was like, wow, it's just a very karmic relationship that we had. And I just have so much reverence for all of the, lessons he learned with me, and things that he taught me through our relationship. And so you may find stuff like that come up for you as well, where there are these shifts that help you evolve, places where you're letting go. And it doesn't mean partners. I mean, letting go of patterns or letting go of old ways of being. Or if you find that you're very much like a Libra, you might be letting go of holding somebody to the archetypal standards that you've set for your partner. Like this is what husband looks like or wife looks like. I'm going to let go of that because I realize that that's causing a lot of distress in our relationship. And or if you're, maybe you're more Aries and you aren't as self-reflective and self-aware as you should be, and that you do potentially bring in this kind of more bombastic and less self-aware energy into a space. And so working on that capacity to refine your relationship skills and to really meet a person in an attuned way, that might be your work during this nodal axis. There's so much covered here. So anyways, now we've got the new moon in Cancer. And like I said, this moon here is at the top of the cardinal cross. And then we've got the nodes kind of holding down the opposite cardinal cross, and then Pluto there at the bottom. And so Aries and Libra, once the nodes move into those signs, which will be later today, will be in what we call a cardinal cross. And so that tends to affect the world. So it'd be just kind of interesting to keep our eyes on current events and like what's happening as new ways of being are initiated. So this full moon then is across from Pluto, or sorry, new moon is across from Pluto. Cancer is a sign that is related to the archetypal great mother. And so we were just talking about archetypal purity, and it's appropriate for astrology and signs to have an archetypal nature, because they're allowing us to see a pattern within ourselves, right? That's what archetypes are. They're essentially patterns and images that are preloaded into the psyche. And so what Cancer represents is the function of the mother at the breast, attachment, secure attachment, right? That sense of feeling safe or safety in the nervous system, the capacity to be nourished. So it's got this building quality to it, this all nourishing, all building, all growing quality. Taurus has a resonance to that. As the moon is exalted in Taurus, we see a lot of growth in Taurus as well, a lot of building. It's an Ayurvedic term. And we use it a lot in relationship to the body type of kapha. It's this like or we would really put a high focus on that when someone is convalescing after surgery or after an illness. Building is that idea of adding nutrients, adding bulk, adding weight, adding, health essentially to a system that is undernourished, right? And so, depending on how our placements in Cancer are, we can see either where we are well nourished or where we aren't nourished. And Pluto being opposite Cancer can sort of show us that, like, where are we lacking safety? Where are we lacking internal safety? Where do we grip and control and hang on to things in order to be a substitute breast, right? Like a teat that we are suckling from because we feel unsafe. That's a very Cancer thing. There's this protection of women and homes and children with Cancer. That's another Cancerian theme. And it's very slow. It's a very yin like sign, and it's related to emotions and the emotional body. And so Pluto being opposite that and having a sort of resonance to the moon itself and its relationship to kind of like that underworld or internal feel. It's got a dimension of soul and internality to it itself. Although, it's dark, it's related to detoxifying and purging, stuff that doesn't serve us. And so there's this great revealing quality that Pluto has. And so him being opposite the new moon may be showing us, like, where aren't we feeling safe? Where are we feeling exposed? Where are we hanging on? Where we might need to grow? Like, where are we using soothing instead of grounding, right? Where do we do emotional management skills, or what we call coping skills, instead of just having our emotions and having some catharsis? Pluto, one of the words that's related to Pluto is catharsis. And so potentially there's something that needs to come up, and with this kind of opposition, it might feel like resistance, like you're just sort of walking around maybe a little frustrated or irritated, or feeling a call to drop in and go inward and be yin like, and instead you're overriding that. It might mean there's some catharsis that needs to happen for the emotional body, and that we need to really, instead of trying to manage or override that to give us a false sense of safety, where do we need to really go in and clean out those feelings, let them air, let them breathe, let the catharsis happen, go momentarily to the chthonic underworld, right? Visit with Pluto, let him help you purge, and then pop back up on the other side. There's a real nice energetic signature with Pluto, and it may even be a help in Cancer. Like, if we can let go of our need for safety, where we're not stopping the process of being pulled down to the underworld, there's this yin like capacity for surrender that's related to the moon and to Cancer. And so the capacity to just sort of like let go of all the places we're gripping so that we don't feel out of control, let go down, and then have our catharsis. And so this new moon, I think, has the potential to really help us clean things out. And as it's related to children, like I noticed, the United States, being born on July 4th, has a Cancer sun, so it's a Cancer, right? And on July 4th, that movie, The Sound of Freedom, came out, and that's, in protection of children. So it's got a very Cancerian theme to it. I'm not surprised they put it out in Cancer. And we'll be drawn to ideas like this, that the desire to protect children and mothers and women, and you've seen issues like that pop up in the collective right now as well. Also, Mary Magdalene's feast day is on the day that Venus goes retrograde on the 22nd. And that's the day that the sun finally moves from Cancer into Leo. So it's kind of neat to know that her retrograde, or sorry, her feast day is really has this idea of divine union embedded in it, in that like Cancer is the sign of the great mother or the goddess, and Leo, the sun king, Christ. And the Vatican made her feast day on this day where the sun moves from one sign to the next. So during that same day, the sun is in both signs. And to me, it's this nod for divine union and this kind of acknowledgement, potentially by the Vatican, that they were in fact married, that there's this merger on her feast day, which I think is incredible. I wrote a whole piece, if you'd like to look at it, about Mary Magdalene and this kind of like modern, like ultra hyper modern day thread inside of feminism, and what Mary might really like to see. And so when we have her feast day in a few days, the invitation is, especially with Venus going retrograde on that day. And so it's a chance to relook, to um, review where we're going. She's long sort of been this feminist symbol, Mary Magdalene, because she defied conventions and norms of her day, right, for women. And I think that there are some places Mary might come back and look at some threads inside of different, there's so many different forms of feminism. So in my essay that I wrote, I was really just pointing to one particular form. But like, it's this opportunity to really look at, like, how are we a stand for women, right? Are we going to continue to be this stand for unrelenting freedom that sort of atomizes us in this hyper individual kind of promotion of liberation? Or is there a way that now we can, now that we have essentially fitted the aims of the first wave of feminism, which was equality under the law, and then it kind of got taken into the social sphere and equality in the social sphere. Like, is there this place that we can reclaim domesticity and a feminism of care as well? So like, we've got this kind of branch of feminism that's a feminism of freedom, and we've attained that. And in essence, in order to attain that feminism of freedom, we've sort of left the feminism of care, which was the domestic realm or the realm of care in general, behind. And so I think it's a beautiful point in time where we've got, Venus going retrograde, the nodes in Venus ruled signs and Libra. Like, how do we recreate an ecosystem where we understand that men and women are actually different? We each have equality under the law, and we each have this beautiful sense of harmonic freedom inside of that. But now we go back and look at, how do we strengthen ecosystems and move away from this kind of like hyper individualistic, hyper independent kind of drive that women have been on, that have left communal life, and how that has damaged sort of, I'm not saying they have, I'm saying that there's been a cost to the hyper independence, in that children don't grow up in communal environments anymore, and they don't have the same support system. They're not resourced in the same way. Sometimes, like, I was a latchkey kid, and I and an only child, so it was just a very kind of lonely childhood. And I can personally get kind of disoriented in big family environments where there is an ecosystem involved, and I feel very kind of left out and out of place and not quite sure how to integrate myself into that space well, because I didn't have exposure to it. But the people that I know that sort of, I guess I can't say this as an absolute truth, that the people I know that have those environments are quite healthy. A lot of them are. That's very true. Like, my husband comes from a huge communal family, and he's one of the um like most mentally sane people I know. Um, doesn't mean we're a match, but I have a lot of reverence for the fact that he's very healthy, didn't have a lot of childhood trauma. There was a study done actually on, so he's from Palestine. So I used to do a lot of work with Palestinian refugees and people who lived in Gaza. And one of the things they found was that children who were traumatized by the war in Gaza had less of a traumatic impact from the events than like just a child who was removed from their home and placed in foster care here one time and then adopted into a good, seemingly stable family. So these are children who lost parents. I mean, real traumas, two bombs. Like they might have lost 4 or 5 family members at one time and lived through this trauma of consistently feeling like they were in danger. Their psyches recovered more healthily than the one child that was removed from the parents and then put in a stable foster care home and then adopted from that home. And what they believe is that the child healed from that situation because it did it in community. And so it was such an indictment of our sort of isolating culture, right? And and so it's interesting to kind of hold that as an experiment, like what brand of feminism am I a stand for? What do I think Mary's brand of feminism might be? Where do I want to be a stand for the feminine in general? And as this is the Cancer new moon, for that idea of domesticity and home and care and community and all of that, that whole shebang is a very up inquiry for the moment with the Cancer new moon and then Venus going retrograde and this opportunity to kind of revise how we've been holding it. And then with the Leo in Venus cycle that's upcoming, it's such a wide opportunity to Sun relates to consciousness, Leo to children play. They both relate to this idea of emergence and presence. It's going to be a very dynamic cycle. So the capacity to morph, shift, and change. But one of the things that the sign of Leo is really good at is this like capacity to be creative, but creative with the self, right? And so there's going to be this real inquiry around like, how do I want to create this next phase of my life? And how and what is my capacity to be seen inside the authenticity of that is going to be a big question of the moment. And what'll be nice is that this whole Venus retrograde and then her changing signs has sort of been squaring Jupiter, and Jupiter's got like a lot of it'll bring up definitely that kind of issue between total unrelenting freedom versus, like how do we want to be ecosystemic sort of in our thinking, but it also brings in the kind of weird and eclectic and interesting, and so that the kind of capacity to like really look at what's true for us by using a bunch of competing stuff. So it'll give us lots of friction, this square for the beginning of this cycle. So there's so much still very exciting astrology up for us for the month of July. There's just still so much going on. And I'm so excited. The day of Mary Magdalene's feast day, the day that Venus goes retrograde, and there is a mystic rectangle. And the mystic rectangle is between, I'd have to pull up the chart. I'm not sure if I have it. Anyways, mystic rectangle, I'm thinking about it like a 40-day challenge because it really is the chart for her retrograde phase. And a mystic rectangle holds in it squares and trines. And so squares are challenging and trines are like, they give resolution. And so it's almost like we're going to have this kind of challenge come up and inside it embedded resolution, and it's going to be a mystical challenge. And so I want you to watch out for those. Like watch out for like, did I have a mystical initiation during Venus retrograde? Because then there's also a yod inside of that. I believe I don't know why in my head I can't think of what the mystic rectangle planets are. Um, anyways, I'll have to save that for another day. But anyways, Venus is at the focal point of that yod, telling me there'll be a lot of Venusian energy. It's a really fun chart to work with. So if you have a chance to pull the maybe I can even do it. See, I see some people who can I don't know if this is still showing. That's the problem. I don't know if I'll be able to do it, honestly. I feel like I'll do it and then it won't be on the screen. So maybe we'll make a separate video for that in a few days to really look at her retrograde chart and all the things that are going to happen inside of that chart, and then looking at the longer Venus cycle. All right. Okay. So yeah, happy astrology time. I think, that there is this really interesting thing with if we are Venusian in as women, right? We can always look to Venus and see what she's doing to help kind of be a way shower. And her being in Libra, there's this very emergent quality of the sun. It's present, whereas the moon relates to the future and the past. The sun is like right now. And there's also this sense of innocent and play and wonder inside of Leo. And I think, for anyone who really feels like they're going through it, like they're really feeling that big new moon Pluto opposition, and like, the structures of safety might be falling down around them, or there's, the emotional body is very activated. I think we can look to Venus in Leo as the kind of the medicine for whatever challenges we're having right now, and just keep coming back to the day, coming back to the moment. See if you can find ways to connect with wonder, right? And magic again, even if it's just being outside in nature and not having like headphones on, not listening to a podcast. Like, can I just be with this, with what's arising in this moment right now and play with it? How do I want to create myself and my life in this very, very moment, in this day, and not allowing ourselves to run out too much ahead of it, staying present. And then, of course, allowing the catharsis to come through. That's really what this new moon is kind of about, is looking at where safety, the idea of safety, nervous system safety, attachment, like all of the different ways we need to be safe in the world. Are any of those holding us back? Are any of those making our lives smaller? Is is there a attachment to homeostasis? Like let's say you feel really good when you're at home and your kids are there, and so you don't go out very much, right? And it doesn't feel as safe. You're more likely to get triggered if you leave your house and a lot and be around other people. Like looking at that, like, is that healthy? Should I be exposing myself more to the outside? And then vice versa, of course, there's the person who is constantly busy, constantly kind of like keeping themselves distracted because they don't feel safe, right? Just being present, just being with themselves. Those are other patterns of safety. So this month we really have the opportunity to the moon. This is the new moon in the sign of the moon. The moon really is a pattern generating machine. It is like those automatic patterns that we just have unconsciously. And they also keep us sort of under this kind of veil of illusion in a sense, because it's just the lens we see the world from until we make those patterns conscious, the sun, presence, right? And so playing with our patterns this month is another Cancer new moon project. And what's nice is the new moon happens at the end of Cancer. So the sun will be in Leo for most of this cycle. And so really kind of helping us play with what are the patterns, bringing a sense of consciousness to them, being able to transmute or transform those patterns into something new. And when we're transforming patterns into something new, we're doing karmic releasing work, which is the South Node in Libra. So just wanted to tie all that together for you. All right, I'll talk to you guys all soon.